Got 20 seconds. Come on, Amanda, go.
Keep moving. Good. Get those knees up. Explode. Good. Explode. Let's go. Up.
Rock forward. Let's go. One more. Go.
You are listening to the Fight Strength Podcast with your hosts, Phil Daru and Jason Burgos.
Welcome back, MMA true believers, for a brand spanking new edition of the Fight Strength Podcast. I am Jason Burgos, and co-hosting this weekly fitness and fighting podcast with me is the very esteemed and multi-talented strength and conditioning coach from one of the premier gyms in all of MMA, American Top Team, the very talented and amazing Phil Daru. Phil, what's going on, man?
What up? It's another day in paradise, I guess, you know. Episode 4, we're doing it. We're getting there.
Yep.
I feel like we're veterans now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're like the best. We're like the top notch right now.
Yep.
I'm expecting awards. If I don't get awards, I'm going to be very pissed right now.
That's all we go for. We got to be number one no matter what.
All right, for the fans of the show or first-time listeners, just a friendly reminder that you can find all our episodes on SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube, and on iTunes. Now, this is episode 4, but please, if you listen to the show, you download the show, you listen to it on work, going to school, wherever, give us a download, listen on your way to these places, and definitely drop a rating and a review. Let people know you enjoy the show, because I know you enjoy the show. I know you didn't like it. It's awesome. But whatever streaming service you use, please let us know. Comment wherever on YouTube, and just let us know what you think of the show. Now, on this edition of the show, we will get to chat with a peer of Phil's in the strength and conditioning business, Blackzilians S&C coach Dr. Corey Peacock. But before we bring on Corey, we will open with the educational portion of the show, the segment where our resident S&C expert gets to expound on his wealth of knowledge. And that segment is known as Ask Phil. We need to get like a really cool like game show kind of sound effect for Ask Phil. I think that'd be perfect for this.
I'm cool with the Jeopardy one. I mean, that's
good.
Something that we can actually look into.
That'd be good. I gotta do that. All right. Now, our first question is from Ida V. Ratio. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I'm hoping that's right. Either version.
Hey, he's from Finland, bro. It's all good.
Oh wow, you and the Finns. You're very popular with the Finns, I think.
Finland, Sweden. I love my overseas people.
Is that why you like the show Vikings? Is that a connection there?
That's my people. And you know what's funny is
I thought you were Cherokee.
People ask me about what's my my last name is actually Italian, but I look damn near Viking, so I'll let that ride.
I thought we talked about last episode that you're Cherokee.
No, we didn't know. And
if you don't know what that means, listen to the 3rd episode with King Mo. It's hilarious. You'll find out what Cherokee's all about. But all right, now to Ida's question. When exercising twice a day, martial arts or strength and conditioning, does 1 or 2 days off suffice, or is once a week necessary?
All right, so this question is kind of stacked. So what I'm going to do is basically let's go from the beginning. So depending on how you actually program the camp and what periodization model you use, or whatever structure you use, you have to take into account of the aerobic and bioenergetic demands of the sport. With that being said, we must manage fatigue and make sure that each individual fighter is peaking right on time. Now, since MMA is a very demanding sport, has high frequency of training, you got your sport specifics and things like that. Each and every week, it becomes more crucial to manage that fatigue and make sure that the fighter is ready in all aspects of the fight game. Now skills coaching makes sure that, you want to make sure that you're actually building a solid base, but 1 to 2 training sessions a week will make that happen. Now, like I said, with the circumstances in the fighter's schedule, you also want to make sure you take into account that fatigue factor. Now, in some cases, one time a week may have to do because of the demands of that training schedule for the fighter. Like, for instance, 3 to 4 weeks out from Joanna Jędrzejczyk's fight, we had to cut her down to 1 time a week because she was just going hard all day long and all week long. So we had to kind of cut that down. Now, for MMA, there's many practices going on, like I said, throughout the day and even in the weeks added. So for a physical preparation, that single day may not be optimal for performance and fatigue management. So we want to make sure that we're getting the best out of each day. Now, I would suggest working on weaknesses and fixing imbalances in your strength training sessions. Your conditioning should be through your skills training and things like that. So, I mean, as far as like your skills training before conditioning, nothing beats, like I said, sparring and rolling. Other than that, we can always work on alactic, anaerobic conditioning, like short sprint intervals and things like that on those 1 to 2 days. And then when we get closer to the fight, then we could work on more lactic conditioning, something like a circuit, like I talked about in earlier podcasts and earlier episodes. So from that being said, all in all, I always go with like a 2-week or 2 time a week approach, and making sure that they're getting the best out of those 2 days, working through, strength, power, explosive strength, power endurance, all these modalities in one. But we're also making sure we're periodizing that appropriately throughout the camp.
I have an observation and a question. Well, one when I was recently doing jiu-jitsu classes, I would take 6 days off. I mean, that was my optimal rest period, but not for everybody. But the question I have, since you're talking about rest, and you see a lot of fighters in their training, and you would notice that you're training so many high-level fighters. You see, you hear fighters say, "Oh, we train 2, 3, whatever times a day." Like, in terms of just on a daily level of rest, is that dictated by a particular fighter? Is that a common thing throughout the sport? Like, what decides, how many times you work out a day, and then is there an optimal amount per day?
So I can only go off of what my circumstances and what I've actually found. Now, personally, with the guys I have and the girls I have, I make sure that after fights, they get on a strict, pretty much a post-fight or post-camp strength and conditioning program. This way they can set a base wide enough so when they get into camp, it's not feeling like brand new. They don't get overtrained. They don't feel sore. They're basically primed and ready to go come 8 weeks out. So it's individualized, and it's especially, each individual has their own, fitness level and training experience. But you want to make sure that they're ready to go before they start camp. Now, some guys may get fights on short notice and things like that. They should still be ready to go at all times, because that's the name of the game in this sport. So you want to stay ready. You don't have to ever get ready. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the opportunities outside of camp to get stronger, to build a little bit of muscle mass, for tissue strength and for joint stability. And then, from there, once camp starts, then we could kind of prime them and peak them for the fight.
All right, now, I also had another question, just giving us all these good questions. Now, the second question was, and you might have answered this on a certain level on previous podcasts or maybe even the writing you've done for MMAsucker.com, but is there an optimal order to training? And he asked, like cardio early and strength in the afternoon, or the other way around? Yeah,
so here's the big thing with that is that, like I said, these guys are training a bunch of different modalities in that one day. So throwing another physical preparation modality in there, it wouldn't be efficient. It wouldn't be optimal for the fighter. I don't believe that you need to do kind of like, it's almost like you're working on CrossFit at this point, because you're trying to work too many aerobic systems throughout that single day. Now, when it comes down to like working through progressions on a weekly to monthly basis, then we can, structure in strength, power, hypertrophy, endurance, things like that. So let's say, for instance, we are 8 weeks out, and I've talked about this many a times. We do something that's called a phase 1 approach. We do a block style periodization model. So we'll take about 8 weeks out, and we'll start doing some overall strength, absolute strength work with a little bit of speed work. And depending on the day, like I said, it's 2 to 3 days a week that my guys and girls will come in to train. It'll be either a linear speed day or a lateral speed day. And then on that off or that third day will be a multi-directional speed day. So they're getting all different directions of speed work in that mesocycle. Or in that microcycle, I should say. Now, with that being said, you also want to make sure that you're making sure that each periodization or each program is going to go into the next. So it's basically it's called potentiation. So when you potentiate the week by week approach, so each phase kind of goes into the next. So phase 2 would be something like more lactic conditioning with a little bit of explosive power and speed work, because they're actually getting ready for the fight at this point. They're about 5 to 4 weeks out, and then you really want to prime them to get them ready accordingly. So there's phase 1, phase 2, and you got phase 1 would be from 8 to about 5 weeks out, given 5 weeks as a deload to kind of give their body a rest to go into phase 2, which is about 4 weeks out. We go 4 weeks to 2 weeks, depending on the level of fitness. So after the 2 weeks, then they start just basically honing in their technique, making sure they're technically sound, getting some sprint work in and some mobility work in. But after that, they should be ready to go from a physical preparation standpoint.
All right, sounds good. It's time for our guest portion of the show. And our guest is a former collegiate athlete and has done some strength and conditioning consulting with pro and collegiate football programs. He is formerly, which we'll talk about soon, the strength and conditioning coach at Blackzilians, but we will get to that. He is strength and conditioning coach extraordinaire, Dr. Corey Peacock. Corey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. So Corey, man, I've had the pleasure to meet you, and I've seen your work. Definitely a fan. You know what I mean? I know that you are something. Some people in the industry, I'm not going to say who, that really doesn't know what they're doing, but you are definitely one of those guys that I can see that I do truly respect and see that you're doing it right. So, I welcome you to the show, and, and keep it going. You know what I'm saying? So
for sure.
What I want to ask you was, first and foremost, man, let's talk a little bit about how you got started in the field of MMA and entirely how'd you get started in strength and conditioning?
For sure. So, you guys kind of said in the intro, I was a collegiate football player, continued playing during my master's degree, and did some coaching along with that. Continued into my doctorate at Kent State University, where I did strength and conditioning along with research, exercise physiology. And when I got to the South Florida area, I started with the University of Miami, focusing on football. Nice. Going into the MMA transition, it's kind of a funny story. Really didn't have a lot of exposure with MMA. I was doing some research, some athlete testing and things like that in the area. Miami Dolphins, Florida Panthers, had built up great relationships with their strength and conditioning staffs. And it was kind of the post-TRT era, and Vitor Belfort was looking for somebody to kind of help guide him once he had to, be cut from his treatment. And he reached out to some of those professional organizations. They all, they both gave Vitor my name, and that's pretty much how I got into it. Just starting as a basic physiologist, athlete testing, and kind of preparing an athletic profile for Vitor. And at the time, I was kind of providing this assistance to Jake Bonacci, who was also with the Blackzilians with me. And we kind of created this hybrid system based off of science and strength and conditioning, and had a lot of success with it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So you mentioned that you're formerly with the Blackzilians. Now, can you give us a little bit of rundown now what you're doing now with the guys over there at Combat Club?
Sure. So the team itself kind of split up. There's a small group of individuals, fighters that I was coaching at one point or another that are still under that Blackzilians umbrella. I believe they're in Pompano Beach now. And I would say the majority of the team, I would say roughly 85% of the team ended up looking elsewhere for training, coaches, and those kind of things. And the majority of us ended up at Combat Club after a transition period where we were still all kind of trying to figure out where we were going to go, who was going to be with who, and that kind of thing. A very inviting atmosphere. Myself, Coach Greg Jones, wrestling, Henry Hoof, striking, and Jake Bonacci for a while. We were training out of there. And then, I would say about 85%, the majority of the UFC, Bellator, World Series guys are over there right now. So that's where I'm at right now, training. And, it's going really well.
All right, cool, man. So I've seen you putting guys through that Vo2 testing over at the university. What exactly is the protocol for those assessments, and just in general for all of your fighters?
Sure. When you look at something like a Vo2 Max, there's a couple of different approaches to it, where some of the approaches rely more on increasing incline. Some of the approaches rely on increasing speed. Some of the approaches rely on increasing both. Ultimately, what all of the tests sort of have in common is that they find something that is, in terms of physiological markers, kind of accomplishes what they call a cardiovascular drift. Basically a steadying of some of the physiological variables, heart rate and metabolism and all of those things. So I've kind of created my own protocol based off of those principles that I've found that actually work really well with our athletes and still don't beat them up, where we've achieved a lot of those physiological markers, but it's a little less intensive and, a little less physically demanding on the body in terms of duration, volume, and those kind of things. What you can really do, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just saying I've seen the approach. I like the way you break it down. Definitely want to get my guys over there actually, and we'll get it going. But for sure, man. But keep going on what you were talking about.
And I think with the Vo2 Max, those people that aren't familiar with it, it's a treadmill test. The athlete's going to be hooked up with some sort of mask or apparatus. And what they're really, I think what people really think of when they think of the Vo2 Max is your ability to use oxygen, remove carbon dioxide, and there's usually a score associated with that. For me, the score itself, it's very relevant to tell how in shape where somebody is at. But for me, what I really like to pull out of this data is, you can identify both the aerobic threshold, the anaerobic threshold in terms of heart rate variables, and you can also identify the amount of caloric expenditure these athletes are expending at certain heart rate zones and stuff like that. So I think it becomes really, multifaceted in terms of applying a training strategy for the cardiovascular, the metabolic system, and also applying a nutritional standpoint, understanding how much an athlete is actually going to be expending or burning during a training session.
Now, with the testing, how long is the duration, and how high is the intensity at that point?
Yeah, I have it to pretty much, I would say the longest test that I've ran is probably about 12 minutes, where I think a lot of the protocols that you would probably learn in school and stuff like that would probably go about 20. So it's a shorter, but in terms of the intensity, we're reaching a max heart rate. There's a variable associated with a Vo2 Max called basically a respiratory exchange ratio. And what this means is it's the ratio in which carbon dioxide exceeds oxygen within the system. Roughly when that is, a little bit more elevated over that oxygen level, that's considered a true max test. So in terms of intensity, we are reaching a true maximum exhaustion test, true cardiovascular exhaustion test.
Nice. Perfect. So as far as like gym performance indicators, what are you using from there? Are you only using the Vo2, or are we doing any type of strength testing, things like that?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of things. I would say this testing battery, I can kind of take you through it starting from the top, working our way down. Some of the resting variables and measures that we're going to utilize, especially when it comes to the weight cut. We're going to take a couple of approaches on body composition. We'll use the DEXA scan for kind of the most accurate body fat, skeletal muscle reading, and then we'll use a BIA or a ultrasound to look at water composition within the body as well. So I think that becomes really important as we start tracking the progress of our athletes.
And quickly though, real quick, for the listeners, explain the BIA real quick.
So it's really just going to look at whole body water. It's going to look at intracellular, extracellular water, and kind of allow you to see both the patterns and water distribution that your athlete's going to be carrying. Relatively as I would say a good indicator or marker for somebody that's going to use this, I would say about 70% in terms of hydration status is going to be really, really positive when you start moving forward into that weight cut and those kind of things.
Nice. Now, this is all done at the university, correct?
Yeah. You know, when we were originally originally with the Blackzilians, we had a lot of this equipment actually there with at the facility with the team. So it started off there. But yeah, everything that I'm doing now at this point, we're doing at Southeastern University at the Health Human Performance Lab for exercise science. You know, really state of the art facility, equipment. You know, a lot of great things going on over there as well.
Awesome, man.
In an interview, you mentioned how you've worked with strength coaches for Miami Hurricanes and the Dolphins, and as you mentioned before, you played, college football. So you, as well as anybody, know, and understand how difficult the training for a sport like football is. Yet, sometimes you often hear about MMA training is even more rigorous. As a strength and conditioning coach, is there a more harsh strength training regimen for MMA fighters, or is it about the same with football?
I don't want to say that it's necessarily more harsh, but I really will say that it's very different. I'll say, and from what I have been traditionally brought up on in terms of strength and conditioning, even physiology, I will say that these mixed martial artists, and I'm sure Phil can attest to this, they're different. They really challenge a lot of those things that you understand when it comes to the human body. I mean, these guys have the ability neurologically to go out and wrestle, to go out and perform jiu-jitsu, judo, MMA, boxing, strength and conditioning, all in the same week and be able to complete, some of the most highly neurological demanding tasks and perform them well. So, it's the complexity that these athletes are able to put themselves through in terms of motor patterns and, really every system of the body. It's really fascinating and it's really challenging. But with that said, I do still believe in a very firm foundation when it comes to strength and conditioning that every athlete is going to be put through a series of movements, whether it's an upper body push, an upper body pull, lower body push, lower body pull, rotation, carry, and those kind of things. So I still build my foundation around the same principles I was building my football programs on. I just believe that I've adapted, a lot of these evaluations and movement screens and things like that. I've seen different weaknesses and asymmetries and distributions and things like that have sort of challenged and changed the way that I've programmed that a little bit, if that makes sense. And Phil, you might be able to expand on that a little bit as well, because I know you've worked with, every sport across the board as well.
It's definitely funny. I'm sitting here shaking my head because I'm agreeing with every single thing you're saying, which is good, man. I think that we're dealing with different animals with these guys, and me being a former fighter and also playing football pretty much all my life, it's definitely a different bioenergetic demand. They're doing multiple modalities in a single week, and it just really depends on that person. But some of these guys never really lifted a weight a day in their life. And we've talked about this before, Corey, is that, you have to kind of manage what we're doing, from a strategical basis, right. Making sure that they're getting the right things at the right times and programming it accordingly.
For sure. And I even think, like, with you saying that, kind of, bouncing off of that, that's what makes this a really tricky situation. And what we're doing is a lot of these guys haven't had a lot of traditional weightlifting, and you think about these guys and what they're already able to accomplish, like just a very little bit of traditional weightlifting and strength, these guys respond drastically. And, we're in a weight cutting sport, and it's really, it's become a problem for me even when I start working with some of these individuals where we start putting on a little bit too much size as they start to do this, because it's new for them. Their body's responding drastically to it.
Now,
that becomes something that becomes an issue with a lot of the old school coaches too, that we have to actually make sure that we're monitoring their weight, but also getting them stronger. So, like I said, programming accordingly and working central nervous system strength, absolute strength, and, building tissue strength, but in a way that, in joint stability, but in a way that it makes sense for the fighter, and keeping it away from closer to the fight. Let's keep it more like off season and later on down the line. You know what I mean? So,
Absolutely.
you know how it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I'm a novice in strength and conditioning. Whatever I can learn from Phil, I try to take it all in now. But the science of strength and conditioning seems to continue to evolve constantly. So for guys like you and him, research and finding new techniques, I'm sure is a key to staying at the top of the industry. For people out there listening that are in the business or plan to join it, what are some of the sources you often mine to stay ahead of the curve, and where do you go to get, stay at the top of the level? And Phil, you can answer this too.
For me, I read a lot. I mean, I really do read a lot. There's certain people out in the industry and out in the field that I follow as well. I'll follow DeFranco's gym quite a bit. I would say they've been a really good resource for me. The head of performance up there, Cameron Joss, he's doing really, really high level stuff in terms of velocity based training. He's also kind of evolved this, he's got kind of this hybrid system that he's utilizing, and I think it kind of spiraled from one of the Cal Dietz systems where, he's comparing certain counter movement, jumps and plyometrics compared to non-counter movement jumps and plyometrics, and kind of creating this, he's kind of created this system in which he can identify power deficits, strength deficits, and things like that. They're a great resource of information all the way around. And like I just said, Cal Dietz, he's kind of the creator of the triphasic training system. Westside Barbell, I think, has been, always a huge component to learning. I'm originally from Ohio, so whenever I get the chance to actually get home, I usually fly into Columbus, and that's a facility that I've been lucky enough to visit, spend the day, and really just learn from those guys and some of the great work they're doing. And Phil, I'll let you kind of expand off of that. Where you kind of pull your information.
Yeah, and like I said, if you're trying to get in this industry and you're trying to be somewhat of a authority in the coaching realm, you have to constantly be learning. You have to constantly be, making sure that you're reading, listening to podcasts like this, listening to audiobooks. I drive about 9 hours a week, 9 to 10 hours a week. And in my drives, I make sure that I'm listening to some audiobooks and I'm listening to podcasts, making sure that I'm getting the best out of my time. Now, since I'm in the trenches, doing 10-hour days, training people. And so same with Corey. Corey's a professor. He has to do a lot of work with that. But, any little time that we have, we're constantly learning. And the same goes for me. I think Brett Bartholomew has some good stuff going on with him. Zach Evanesh, like I said earlier in podcast. Same thing with Joe DeFranco. I'm a big Joe DeFranco advocate. That's how I started my gym, learn from him, learn his ways. And of course, Louis Simmons, Westside Barbell, making sure, and I make sure that I'm attending seminars and workshops and things like that on a constant basis. And you have to be continuing education because there's new things coming out each and every day. And Corey can attest to that also. Now, I did see that Corey did go to an Exos conference this past weekend. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was actually at the conference was the International Society of Sports Nutrition. It was the annual conference in Phoenix.
Okay.
Aside from that, myself and Chris Algieri, he's a former world champion, and actually Pacquiao's fighting tonight, fought Manny Pacquiao within the past 2 years. Chris is still, active and fighting, but Chris is also the sports performance nutrition coach for Stony Brook University and works a lot of the fighters that I'm working with as well from the nutrition standpoint. So him and I took some time to get away from the conference and went to the Exos facility. Exos spent a lot of time working with the UFC and some of the UFC athletes before the Performance Institute was created. And, we went over there and kind of opened up conversation, just to check out the facility. And, a lot of great things I think came to fruition in that conversation. And, hopefully this, we can get some good things going moving forward as well. In terms of the nutrition conference, a lot of great stuff as well out in Phoenix, a lot of really invasive researchers in the sports performance field. So really good experience.
I mean, listen, if Corey can get his PhD and get to the highest level of what we're doing here and still want to learn and grow, that just shows you that it's always about learning. It's always about growing. And this guy, I mean, obviously, He's been through it all with as far as schooling goes, man. I'm only, I'm a meathead at heart. So for him to do that, you know what I mean? I think that, like, I truly see the benefit in continuing education. But for sure, man, that sounded like a great experience, and hope to do that soon as well. Absolutely. Now, when it comes to your training approach, because, I always want to know, and especially just learning from myself, like we said,
right.
What would you say is like the most important factor for improving that overall performance?
I think that's a really tough question. I do think these guys are so individualized, but I really do believe there's really two foundations that we can do as strength and conditioning coaches to really improve the athlete that I've seen really carry over. The first thing we kind of talked about with the metabolic testing and the threshold testing. I think training the individual athletes' thresholds and energy systems, rather than conditioning the athlete for the fight, is one of the most beneficial things that you can do. And I say this when people start to ask me, what do I mean about this? I say, we don't train an athlete to be we don't train their strength to be the strongest person in the actual gym and hope that carries over. We strengthen their weaknesses and hope that carries over. And that's kind of the same thing when you look at the cardiovascular system. I'm not conditioning them for 3 5-minute rounds. I'm conditioning their energy systems so that they can utilize them more efficiently during their training when they're on the mats, and that's kind of where their conditioning comes from. So, that's become really a cornerstone for what I've been doing. Heart rate monitoring and those kind of things has been really, really important. I would say the second thing in terms of my approach that I've really seen improve the overall athleticism and, ability of our fighters, I would say their rotary stability, their rotational abilities, anti-rotation and those kind of things. I think that's really become huge. It's become a really huge component for my programming. Through these evaluations, going through something like, I've seen you're over there using some of the Daru motion analysis. I was using some of the functional movement screening, kind of a little bit before that, kind of broke it down into things that I saw a little bit more beneficial for the sport, different movement screens and stuff like that. But the one thing that I always saw that was really, really unique, and actually when running it from a statistical standpoint was statistically significant, was our athletes that had a better ability to, rotate or anti-rotate. Those were our athletes that were actually UFC, Bellator, World Series contracted fighters compared to our amateurs and our professionals fighting in some of the smaller organizations. So I thought that was a really unique aspect, and I think it's been funny to watch some of these athletes that are starting to, follow the program and prove that ability, as you kind of see them not only improving that ability, but it is carrying over into their training, into their fighting, and, you're watching them start to progress in terms of the level of competition and organization and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely, man. I see a major change in the way, things are being approached, and from all aspects. And we talked about this on the first episode with Dean Thomas, is that, now even with the skills training, we're being more scientific in our approaches as far as, film study and things like that, and making sure that we're strategically going about programming instead of just like throwing them out there, making them, spar for 10 hours and then go run, things like that, and doing, lactic conditioning till they pass out, So, I mean, I think that this is a good step in the right direction, and people like yourself and, hopefully I like to think myself as well, are taking the right proper steps to help these guys out, But, like I said, since me and you have like that similar view, because everything you're saying, I'm like shaking my head over here, like definitely loving it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we have similar situations as well. So what I want to know is, how do you approach training when you have groups of fighters with different fight dates and different weight classes and things like that, and experience levels? And how do you really, go about your daily routines?
Yeah. I think just kind of breaking it down, kind of like you said, with different fight dates and things like that. I'll use 3-week blocks when I'm actually programming. I think that's become useful. I base that around kind of where the majority is, and I guess it's one of those things too. I guess I need to take a step back. and Phil, I know you know this too as well. It's kind of, you do have levels of fighters on your roster, on your team. You have guys that are fighting for titles. You have guys that are top 15 fighters. You have guys that are professional fighters in the UFC that have just gotten there. And then you have some of your developmental fighters, your sparring partners, your, some of the local organizations that are trying to make that leap up to that next step. So I think with that always kind of affects your ability to how much time you can spend and dedicate towards them, whether it's a one-on-one session, whether it's a small group session, or whether it's a larger group session. So, the one-on-one is the one-on-one. I don't think I need to go into that. The smaller groups, what I think we've kind of, the system that we've kind of come across is with these evaluations, with the, looking at some of the deficiencies, we found athletes with similar flaws or similar characteristics that need improved. So a lot of times we like to group that and find people that have similar dates, similar characteristics, and kind of program them together. For the larger groups, that to me is our athletes that are kind of still trying to make it to the bigger organizations and stuff like that. I'll base it off of kind of who's closest to their fight and what can we do with that. I've been running a in-season or an in-camp group, an out-of-camp group with kind of the larger groups, and I'll run those twice a week, where I'll run an in-season twice a week, or an in-camp twice a week, out-of-camp twice a week, the in-camp being a little bit geared more towards fight-specific, speed-specific training, and the out-of-camp being a little bit geared towards the foundations and the fundamentals. And then, like I said, with our smaller groups, our real small groups, that's usually still our UFC guys, our maybe not ranked UFC guys, where I'll run them in 2s and 3s, and then our ranked fighters and our title contenders and things like that will get all one-on-one individual attention.
Nice.
And that's kind of where we're at with it.
Now, as we talked about earlier, you're no longer with the Blackzilians. About a month ago, Chuck Mindenhall from MMA Fighting, he did like a really in-depth article on the issues going on in the Blackzilians. Did you ever were you aware or ever caught up, or did work ever become problematic with what was mentioned in the article was a lot of issues between the owner, Glenn Robinson, and Henry Hoof? Did that ever cause a problem for you while working there?
Well, one thing I'll say, and this is one of the things I hate, like when I read those articles and things like that, the one thing that I really hate that's overlooked when you look at all this, because there were problems. I mean, there's no question, there's problems in, now being a part of the sport, there's problems like this in every camp. Like it's really, I've never really seen a sport where people become so territorial. I've come from organized sports my whole entire life, where everybody has a specific role and there is one guy in charge, and if you don't follow that role, then he gets rid of you, So this sport's really unique, where, man, people almost create their own little teams and their little, it's really unique and it's really different, and I've never been exposed to something like that before. The one thing, though, going back to this that I hate that people overlook this is when all of these problems and all that turmoil were going on last year, we won 85% of our fights. We were on a roll. I mean, we were killing it last year. And, but there were still problems. So in terms of my day-to-day, the goal was the same, man. Everything I was doing was for these fighters, working with these coaches, and, working for Glenn, who was my boss at the time. I tried to really stay out of it as much as I possibly could. When things split up and certain fighters and people that you had to work with and you knew you could work with, and at first it was kind of one of those things where everybody was kind of just and we still are really all independent. I know Henry's got H Kickboxing, Greg Jones has got Jones Wrestling, I have Peacock Performance, but yet we're all just working at the same place. We're kind of trying to create this atmosphere where it's not a team atmosphere. It's just good people that want to come in and train with no problems. And, that's really what we've kind of established or created here with this combat club venture that we've moved on to. In terms of the problems between Glenn and Henry, there were problems, and, hopefully at this point it's resolved, and I think parting ways and kind of getting a fresh start was probably the best thing for everybody involved.
So what made you officially move over to this new gym? Was there a certain event that happened, or you've been working at this and planning this for a while, or is Blackzilians, fully dissolved? Like, what made you finally make the shift over?
Not at all. None of it for me was planned. It was really just at a certain point, there was really no opportunity to continue with the Blackzilians. It wasn't really it wasn't like a firing, this dramatic, we need to let you go. It was just really the opportunity to work at the level that, I wanted to work at just wasn't available anymore. And, from that point on, I kind of moved around a little bit and, kind of was working with just individuals and that kind of thing. And then, Combat Club kind of opened its doors and said, you're more than welcome to work with the fighters here, utilize our facility, and, prepare the athletes that are training here for competition. And, it just kind of evolved from there. And for me, I think it was a good thing. It was, really time to kind of start expanding my brand a little bit, while still working with these high-level athletes and still working with, great coaches that I've been able to work with and be successful working with in the past.
Like you mentioned, the gym was on fire. I mean, even there were problems. You were winning a lot, and like this was a premier gym just a year or so ago. What would you say was your best, your most lasting memory of the time, and your final thoughts at being at that gym?
Man, there were so many good things that happened there. I mean, really, things were good for a really long time. It just all kind of got out of hand there towards the end in terms of the problems. There were, accumulating problems and stuff like that. But, I would say Kamaru Usman with, Tough 21 when he won that, when he fought Hyder, and, that the whole season and stuff like that was just so much competition. It's so great to see, it's so great to see all of these athletes, both ATT and, former Blackzilians who are, local circuit or now UFC, Bellator, and that kind of thing, all really becoming successful off of this show. And for me, to be honest with you, like I said, I started working with Vitor, and then that kind of carried over just into the show itself, where it was like, okay, hey, maybe you can contribute a little bit in terms of scientific approach. And, and I think, honestly, really one of the things that I think I was brought in for when it came to the show was just because I think they thought it looked cool for the camera, to be completely honest. And then, I really do. I really think that was kind of the cool thing. We have a physiologist and a doctor on staff. It makes us different than, ATT or the other teams and stuff like that. And I think that was kind of the point of it. And then, here we go into, now we have Anthony Johnson and Cormier. Now we have Weidman and Vitor, and I'm still working with those camps. And, the position just evolved. So, in terms of, there's so many good memories. And, looking at this, the ability to work with some of these guys, Rashad and Vitor and Anthony, man, these guys are legends of the sport, and watch them, in their ups, their downs, be successful, not successful, and all of those things, it's been exciting from every aspect.
Do you see yourself, continue on for a long time with MMA training, or is there, you're a former athlete, you've, dealt with college programs and NFL strength and conditioning coaches. Is there a eventual goal? Would you like to eventually move to a professional job, either in any sport, football, whatever sport there is, or even a college program?
I've thought about this, and to be honest with you, especially when things kind of broke apart with the team and stuff like that, I had a few opportunities, both collegiately and then professionally outside of MMA to do a couple of different things. And, just to be honest with you, there were a lot of good ventures and opportunities, but I'm just not quite done with this sport yet. And I don't know how long that's going to be, but I think there are so many things that can be done to improve this sport, to improve the longevity of the sport, the health of our fighters, the longevity of our fighters' careers, and these people that I've become really, really close with. I'm not finished with the sport. I think there is an impact that can be made with people like myself, with people like Phil, with people like Tony Ricci up north in New York, that are all doing things right and trying to make progress in the sport from a performance aspect and proper periodization and proper training, that I'm just not ready to step away from it yet. But in terms of, is that something that I may potentially do in the future? I don't know. I didn't think I'd ever walk away from football, and, the opportunity presented itself, and I did.
Now, one more question we have is from our listener, Dimitri. He's from Finland. Phil has a lot of friends in Finland. He's well-renowned. Yeah. And Phil, you can answer this too. He asks, are there benefits to isometric training like calisthenics, ring gymnastics, levers, etc. in MMA?
Phil, I'll let you start with it.
Well, as far as like isometrics, we're talking about a sport that you stay in clinching. You're staying clinches, you're wrestling, you're grinding against the cage. So yes, isometric contractions, if you understand that, there's no lengthening of that muscle tissue. You're kind of just basically, staying in one position and trying to just squeeze everything out of that position. So yes, I think that isometric training is a definite, and I put it in my programs indefinitely, but it does have a benefit. Now, as far as like calisthenics or ring gymnastics, now, as far as like my young kids, we can go all the way back. When you start out as a kid, to build good kinesthetic awareness, proprioception, things like that, and just being able to move properly, I think that gymnastics is a great sport to be a part of. I think that should be like a centerpiece or a ground base for athletic performance. For fighters in general, I think that this could actually help them from, like I said, a general movement capability standpoint. And I think that it could benefit you, but it just depends on what you are actually doing. Don't get too far away from, your sport-specific movement patterns. But like I said, I guess he's talking about, the things that he's seen with GSP, and I guess now that Holly Holmes is doing it, I think that that's a big thing. But there's always niches, there's always new things that people want to do, but it really just comes down to proper periodization, like Corey said before, and just knowing the body and biomechanics and proper form through the skills and sport-specific demands of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the isometric has been a huge component of my programming as well. One thing that I've really started to utilize, and again, I know people are going to listen to this, and I know they're going to have an image in their head. So I did a certification down in Miami. I did the On It Steel Mace certification. I know people are probably already picturing me having my fighters swinging these things around their head, whacking. That's not the case. But what he actually showed us a couple of really good isometric movements with the actual mace where, basically one hand is over there at the loaded end and another hand is away from that. And everything you're doing in terms of like body movement, you're trying to pull the mace apart. You know what I mean? So you're really stuck in a good isometric squeeze. And I'll put my fighters into maybe, an athletic position, a squat position, maybe even some sort of, single leg or unilateral position with an isometric hold with the mace. And the mace has actually become a really good tool for me. I don't use it for much more than the isometric portion of my programming, but it's become, a really useful tool, and I've been able to periodize it based off of the complexity of the actual movement and all of those things, or the body positioning and stuff like that. So yeah, isometrics are huge. The calisthenics and stuff like that, like Phil said, is if it doesn't become the cornerstone to your training, then yeah, it's always a great, accessory and something to implement within the program to add some variety and maybe identify some weaknesses and, correct movement and things like that. So, but again, it can't be the entire program. You can't be hanging rings for the entire program. You're not going to make the adaptations.
Yeah, it's just another tool in the toolbox. You know what I mean? Exactly. You gotta make sure that you have everything. Now, I like that mace idea, though. I'm gonna have to pick your brain on that one.
Yeah, for sure. It was really, it was good. And it's really become a really good tool for me. Rather than, at first it was kind of like I was just kind of thinking of ideas like, what can I really do? It was always just, squeeze a med ball, squeeze a foam roller, do this, do that. That was kind of my isometric work, grip work, back grips, and things like that. And just, it was, again, like you said, just adding another tool to what I'm already doing.
Sure, definitely.
For both of you guys, like, how much of what you do is just, brainstorming on your own? Like, is that the majority of how you come up with new stuff for your athletes and your clients? Is it part researching, seeing what other people work? Is it a mix? How's that done?
Man,
Corey, go ahead on that one.
Yeah, for me, man, I don't think I've been in a real program for my own training in so long because I'm always experimenting on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become one of those things where it's like, I'm sitting here like, what is my goal? What am I even doing anymore? Changing my program, you know what I mean? And I'll start to jump into something, and the next thing you know, 3 weeks in, I see a couple of things now. Okay, now I'm going to experiment a little bit before I try this with my athletes. And then my program goes to hell, but now I have a couple new ideas. So, it's a combination of things. You experiment. I think there really always has to be, a nice thing that I have, honestly, with me is this lab. I mean, it's been huge for me. Certain things like a Zercher squat. The first time I started implementing the Zercher squat, I had an athlete say to me, okay, what am I doing with my grip? Should I cross my arms and cross my hands like I would in a clinch? Should I leave them open? And I remember saying, I don't know. I don't know what is going to be the better adaptation, and I remember saying, what are you more comfortable with? Well, what did I do? I went to the university, I hooked up a couple of people with EMG, looked at total body activation and muscle activation in both positions, and found that, the open hand Zercher squat actually promoted, like 30% more upper body muscle activity, and the lower body activity was exactly the same. So I thought, in terms of what would be more beneficial for the fighter, let's open that grip up, even though, initially I would have thought the closed hand grip, because it may feel a little bit more applicable to MMA, but realistically, when you go back to what's the actual purpose of this, it's to benefit the muscular system, the greatest, and that, so those kind of things, I guess, it's one of those things. I experiment, I'm a scientist first, and everything that I do is always an experiment, and collecting data, collecting numbers on these fighters, and even putting them through certain, I go through certain phases in my programming and periodization that I've worked with these guys. And when the numbers aren't where I want them to be, then something's got to change. And trial and error.
Yeah. Now, just to piggyback off that Zercher squat, what he's doing right there, basically from a specific standpoint or sport-specific standpoint or simulation standpoint, he's basically getting double underhooks on the bar. So you're talking about, from a grappler standpoint, if you have a strong wrestling background or something like that, I think that would be very beneficial. There's other ways like gable grips and things like that you can actually utilize from another skill specific perspective. But if the data shows that actually is more beneficial, then why not? You know what I mean? The good thing about what Corey has going for him is that he is a true scientist. There's no bullshit going on. You know what I mean? Me personally, I make sure that a lot of my stuff is practical application. I don't have a lab like that, but I do have my own private facility that I'll go ahead and experiment like that. I call that my lab. So, I mean, I think that makes it a little bit more like, if you look at my previous videos on Instagram, I was doing some things with the foam roller, making sure, from a glute bridge standpoint, a single leg glute bridge with an anti-lateral rolling device. So making sure that we're getting all aspects and just kind of playing around, you know what I mean, and working through things. And I take things from certain other coaches that I respect, and I try to add on to it, you know what I mean. And it's in people and coaches and trainers nowadays, man, we got to get rid of this notion of like, it's all me, or trying to be just all about yourself and brand yourself. Like, somebody came to me the other day, I guess they see me with the shirt on, was another gym, so they thought that I was getting like promoted by them or they were sponsoring me, but it was just somebody that I liked. It was one of my guys that, I just respect in the field, and I just decided to wear his shirt. It has nothing to do with, like, if Corey had a shirt, that with his brand name on it, and I decided, I wanted to throw that on at American Top Team, why not? Because I respect Corey and what he does. So, I mean, I think that from that perspective, I think that people need to stop being so egotistical and start learning from other people. And then you can also adapt and do your own stuff from there and grow from it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's always something to learn from everybody, whether it's what to do or whether it's what not to do. But there's always something to learn from those people around you and support those people around you, and really give your feedback and give your criticism and in a constructive manner to improve those kind of things. It's one of those things, man. I can honestly say this. For me, making that transition from football into the MMA world, and I mentioned him earlier. Jake Bonacci was the strength and conditioning coach at the Blackzilians along with myself, and he's been in the sport for almost 10 years. I mean, he was doing an internship with Randy Couture when he beat Gabriel Gonzaga for the title. He's been in this for a long time. And if that guy would have just, if he wouldn't have taken the time to really spend with me and allow me to understand some of the demands of the sport and some of the things and some of the flaws that he's seen with his, with the training he's used and the progression he's made, I'd never be where I'm at today in this field and in this sport. And you know what I mean? That's one of those things. We have to be there in terms of professionals supporting each other and helping each other to become better, because if we're all better in this field, we're going to improve the sport, and the sport drastically needs it.
Yeah, definitely. Jake's a good guy. We've messaged back and forth on a consistent basis, and we share a mutual friend. But yeah, definitely, man. And we've talked about this, Corey. Definitely got to sit down together and kind of talk shop a little bit and go from there. And that's just the way it has to be. It should be like that. And like you said, Corey, I know if you have other opportunities to get out of the sport and do something better, or quote unquote better, but I think that if you did leave the sport, it would do the sport a disservice. And I think that we need more guys like yourself and like Jake, to keep holding it down and grow the sport. You know what I mean?
No, I completely agree with you. I completely agree. I think there's a very good group of strength and conditioning coaches and a very good group of people out there in this field that want to be, good strength and conditioning coaches that are willing to learn and put in the time and sacrifice and that kind of thing, that, it really, any one of us taking the hiatus, it'll be an impact on the sport. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Before we go, Corey, is there anything you'd like to promote for anybody listening so they can continue to, get this valuable information, like, a Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, personal page, anything you want to let anybody know about?
Sure. Peacockperformance.com you can find a lot of my information there. In terms of social media, just go to Dr. C Peacock, DrCPeacock. I would say that's probably your easiest source for information, way to contact me, send me a message. I'm pretty active in terms of that. I feel like I get a lot of direct messages and things like that, asking questions. And, for me, I really enjoy that interaction with the people out there trying to get better and trying to learn, because a lot of times some of the questions that they're asking me, it really makes me self-reflect and take the time to, maybe reevaluate why I'm doing something or what I'm doing as well. So, Peacock Performance, Dr. C Peacock, that would probably be the easiest way.
Phil, you know the deal. We'll give them your social info.
For sure. Okay, so check it out. So you already know Instagram is Daru Strong, Twitter is Daru Strong, Snapchat Daru Strong 1, putting up videos on a constant basis. Also, if you want to get on my newsletter, go to darustrong.com and sign up for that. It's right on the front page. I'll be trying to put up at least, a couple of things, 1 or 2 times a month. Just with my schedule, it's kind of tough, but I'll definitely try to get those newsletters out to you as much as I can. So if you want, go ahead and sign up for that, and the rest is history.
Now, always remember, anybody listening, you can please follow us on our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter at FightStrength_. Do not forget, you can find us on Google Play, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Download us, give us a listen. I am Jason Burgos. Thank you again to Dr. Corey Peacock for joining us, and he is, as you know, co-host Phil Daru. Come back next time, everybody. Bye-bye.